Okay, so without further ado, I am going to introduce our presenter for our presentation on cannabis legalization and municipal policy. Andrea Zapcic has a career in field of substance use prevention in 1998 when she was hired as Brick Township's Municipal Alliance Coordinator. And in 2004, she was promoted to Superintendent of Recreation, where she continued to supervise the activities of the Alliance. In 2009, Andrea accepted a position as Director of Parks and Recreation and eventually Senior Services with the City of Rahway, where she was responsible for overseeing their municipal alliance. Under her direction, the Rahway Municipal Alliance became the Rahway Prevention Coalition, receiving a federally funded drug-free communities grant in 2014. And if you're familiar with the drug-free grant, it's a lot of work too. In December of 2017, Andrea joined the staff of our WJ Barnabas Health Institute for Prevention and Recovery, where she oversees all community prevention programs and the nationally recognized DART Prevention Coalition of Ocean County. Andrea has been a member of the Brick Township Council since 2014 and is the liaison to the Brick Municipal Anti-Drug Coalition. Some of you may have already seen her presentation because we did bring it to the cast, which is for our alliances. As well as NJPN had her come and host as well. It is fantastic. It is timely. It is wonderful. And we're just really, really excited to have her here today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And without further ado, Miss Andrea.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everybody. It's good to be on. I recognize some familiar faces. So I kind of feel once the numbers started beginning with a 6 in my age, I stopped using the term old friends. So it's new friends I haven't met yet, and friends that are continuing. So thank you for that warm welcome. Kate, can I share do I have screen sharing capabilities?
Yeah, see, I'm glad I'm not alone. I was saying the same stuff.
And I'd like to beg all your indulgence. I'm going to turn my camera off during the presentation so that you don't see like my cats in the background flying past, because it's almost time for second lunch, and papers flying and everything else. And then I will start the presentation. Share. And oops. Slideshow. From the beginning. Okay, there we go. So as Kate mentioned, I have been in the field of prevention for a while. I've also been on now my 6th year on the Brick Township Council. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm really not going to put my prevention hat on. I'm really going to talk about what's in the law and how it affects municipalities, because there's a very short, very narrow window for municipalities to act, given the law that was enacted. So I'm really going to focus there. There's a couple options that municipalities have, and I'm going to step through each one of them. And I'm really just going to lay it out. I'm going to try and keep my opinion out of this as much as possible, if not entirely. That's the goal entirely. Whether I meet that mark, that will be up to you all at the end. But that is really the goal, to just lay it out. And sort of help guide whatever conversations you may wish to have with your local government officials. So I will qualify all this by saying I am not an attorney. I don't even play one on TV. And for those of you who get that joke, you know exactly how old I am. So the time to act is now. So the one thing I forgot to mention on that first slide is that I am going to use, anybody that saw this presentation on the NJPN call, you will notice a few differences, because every time I do it, I kind of up my game a little bit and go in and change things that I notice. And one of the things that happened in that meeting was I used the word marijuana, and I was called out on it. The New Jersey legislature, the bill, Assembly Bill 821, which created the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Assistance and Marketplace Modernization Act, has determined that the word cannabis is to apply to the legal market. And when the word marijuana is used, that is in reference to the illegal market. So I'm going to try and keep in that lane. And because we're talking about the legal market here, so I'm planning to use the word cannabis. But sometimes it's tough to teach an old dog new tricks. So I may slip up every now and again, but no offenses intended. The focus of this is really going to be on the legal cannabis market. The law created an entity called the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. And basically, they are the ones, although there's the law itself in its pamphlet form is 166 pages. There's a lot in it, but essentially there is a lot that's not in it that has been left to the discretion of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. They just started meetings in April. They've had 3 so far. The 4th one is next week. And at the end of this presentation, I'll put up a slide with their web address. They are public meetings. They're all virtual at the moment. They are public meetings. So the public can join in, the public can speak. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So basically what A21 did was it established a deadline for municipalities to act. And that deadline is 180 days from the time the law was signed into, from the time the bill was signed into law, which was February 22nd. So the effective deadline for municipalities to have any kind of an ordinance in place is August 22nd. Now, under the law in the state of New Jersey, in order for a municipality to enact an ordinance, it requires two readings at two separate public, let me try this again. 2 readings at 2 separate public meetings. The second meeting has to have an open public hearing where the public can speak and voice their opinion. And then following that is a vote. And after the vote, the ordinance goes into effect in 21 days. That allows the municipality, they are obligated to publish ordinances in full in a local daily newspaper. In addition, the ordinance may have to go before the planning board or the zoning board in between the first and second meetings. So that effectively brings the deadline to begin action to around June 21st. That's a bit of a moving target, depending on whether municipalities have 1 meeting a month or 2 meetings a month, but that's probably June 21st is probably inching close to the drop dead deadline to get the process started. Opting in or opting out by ordinance provides the most municipal control. And any municipalities who enacted ordinances prior to February 22nd, 2021, and going back to about 2019, there were about 70 or 80 municipalities in the state that had made a preemptive strike as the early bills were working their way through the legislature prior to the referendum. Some municipalities made what they felt was a preemptive strike and passed ordinances. They will have to be redone. The A21 basically makes those prior ordinances null and void. So any municipalities that opted out, that want to stay out, have to do another ordinance before the August 21st deadline. So I'm going to go through 3 options: opting in by ordinance, opting out by ordinance, or doing nothing at all. And just to kind of lay out what actually will transpire as a result of that. So the bill created 6 classes of cannabis licensing: cultivation, manufacturer, wholesale, distributor, retail, and delivery service. By enacting opt-in ordinances, towns can actually decide which classes of licenses they want to permit. So for example, a town, a more rural town that has a lot of farmland may want to permit cultivation, but nothing else. They can do that in an opt-in ordinance. A town that has perhaps a lot of empty warehouse space that they want to repurpose, they can opt into distribution or manufacture and opt out of everything else. But it has to be done by ordinance within the deadline. Towns can also decide which zones certain classes of licenses can operate in. Maybe a town wants to zone everything into an industrial zone. They can do that if they do it by the deadline. And then how many classes of licenses they want to allow. If they do want to allow dispensaries, they may say, well, we only want to allow 3 if it's a small town. They can do that by ordinance. They can also enact a local licensing requirement and assess local licensing fees. They can also restrict the operation days, times, and manners of business. but that's only for classes 1 through 5. They cannot restrict the operation, days, times, and manner of business of delivery, which is what would be bring home delivery of cannabis items to residents. And they can finally also adopt civil penalties for ordinance violations on any of the things on this slide. A21 also allowed for the provision for dispensaries to have on-site consumption areas, and they have to apply separately to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission for approval on that. But there's two types of on-site consumption areas. One is indoor, and that's where it's completely enclosed within the building, and it can only be reached through the interior of the retail facility, and it has to have appropriate ventilation, same as required for cigar lounges. Or outdoor consumption area where there has to be barriers in place to screen the area from the public. If a municipality by ordinance can prohibit, they can say, all right, we want dispensaries, but no on-site consumption areas. So that's something that can also be done in their opt-in ordinance. And then just a final note on the on-site consumption areas, there is a provision in the law that says any cannabis that's brought to the facility for on-site consumption or bought in the facility for on-site consumption and not carried out has to be destroyed. So people can't leave anything behind. Towns can also prohibit locally based Class 6 delivery systems, but they cannot ban or restrict home delivery within their township limits. So what this means is that if they're opting out, they can opt out of Class 6. Say I wanted to run a delivery system delivery service out of my house, and I live in a town that has opted out. I can't do that. But as a resident, if I wanted to receive home delivery, that opt-out ordinance doesn't apply. Towns cannot prohibit outside entities from delivering to residents. And then finally, on the opt-in ordinance, that will have to go before planning and or zoning for approval between the first and second reading. It really depends on what you're doing with the opt-in ordinance. A planning board will typically look at an ordinance to make sure that it meets the township master plan. A zoning board would look at an ordinance to make sure that it conforms with zoning regulations. So if your town is going to zone a cannabis business to a specific zone, then that will likely have to go before the zoning board as well. Again, I'm not a land use attorney, so please consult with your attorneys for further guidance on that. So towns that want to opt out. So if a town wants to opt out, and this is a little bit of a repeat of what I said at the beginning, they have to introduce an ordinance at a council meeting. That's considered the first reading. There's typically not a public hearing. There's not a formal public hearing on a first reading. Whether towns allow comment on first reading, that's kind of up to them. That doesn't prohibit the public from commenting on that ordinance during an open public comment session, but there's no formal hearing at the first reading, and the vote by the council or the committee on that first reading is really just the introduction of the ordinance. Then it goes to another meeting for second reading, and in between it gets published in the newspaper. So that sort of lets the public know that the public hearing is going to be at the next meeting or whatever meeting that's scheduled for. The ordinance should list all classes of licenses that are banned. So that there's no discrepancy. If you want to ban 1 through 6, they should be listed separately. If you're only going to ban 1, 3, and 5, then that should be stated as well. Again, the ordinance may have to go before planning and zoning, check with your municipal attorney. Then there's a second reading and a public hearing. And immediately following the public hearing, the council takes a vote to adopt, or they can take a vote to table it. Last night, Tom's River had their public hearing, second reading and public hearing. And at the end of it, there was so much public opposition that they voted to table the ordinance for the time being. If the council votes to adopt the ordinance will go into effect 21 days after adoption. A town can opt back in. A town that opts out, it appears they can opt back in at any time. And I say appears because 3 of the 4 municipal attorneys that I've heard opinions from have said, yes, they can opt back in at any time. That the state is really not looking to punish towns that opt out. They want to establish a vibrant and robust legal cannabis market in New Jersey. So it is very unlikely that a town that opts out will not be able to opt back in. You will see headlines, because I've seen it twice now in local media. So-and-so town opts out for 5 years. There is nothing in the statute that says if you opt out, you're out for 5 years. I'll tell you when I move on to the next section where that 5 years comes in. But it does not appear that a town cannot come back into the program. You could opt out today and then next year opt back in. So failure to act by the August 21st deadline, which means no action whatsoever by the local governing body, this is where the 5 years comes into play. If the municipal governing body does not take action, either opting in or opting out by ordinance, they're automatically in for 5 years. During that 5-year time, the municipality must allow license classes 1 through 4 in all industrial zones, and class 5, which is retail licenses, dispensaries, in all commercial and retail zones. This is why it's really, really, really important for towns to look at their zoning. I can only speak for Brick Township because, and I won't even say that I know the zoning in Brick intimately, but I'm familiar with Brick's zoning. The way our town was built out, we have a lot of mixed use zoning. We also have commercial or retail zones that back right up to local neighborhoods. We actually looked at our zoning to see if there was a place we could zone it, and there really wasn't. Even the one industrial park that we have in Brick backs right up to one of the elementary school and middle school complexes. There was no zone where there was a 500 to 1,000 foot buffer between a retail zone and a residential zone. So it's really important that towns look at this before deciding they're just going to not do anything and let the chips fall where they may. So because once they are in, they're in for 5 years. They cannot opt out for 5 years. And any cannabis businesses that get established during that 5-year period are grandfathered in against a future opt-out. So in other words, at the end of the 5 years, towns can revisit and say, you know what, we're done with this. This really wasn't what we thought it would be, and we're going to opt out. But any cannabis businesses that were established during that period are grandfathered in for as long as that business remains. So the biggest pushback that a lot of elected officials are seeing on this issue is, aren't we leaving a lot of tax money on the table? So I really want to focus the next part of this presentation on exactly how much tax revenue there is for municipalities. Under the law, each municipality can establish its own tax rates, but in no case, and this is directly from the law, shall the rate exceed 2% on cannabis cultivation, 2% on cannabis manufacture, 1% on wholesale, and 2% on retail. So what this essentially means is that the state is assessing a sales tax on cannabis businesses, and all of that money funnels up to the state. Municipalities can assess an additional 1 or 2% on the sale of cannabis in their municipality. And that's what actually stays within the municipality. So I started this journey and all of this because the question kept coming up, well, how much is it? What does 2% actually look like? So I decided to take a look at Colorado. And, a lot of people will say, Colorado, you anti-marijuana people, oops, there I go again, anti-cannabis people are always talking about Colorado. Why Colorado? Well, Colorado has had a legal market just about as long as any of the states that have legalized. And I got to tell you, Colorado's got incredible data, and they are very transparent about their data. The Colorado Department of Revenue website, you can go there and and they split out their sales on separate spreadsheets, medical versus recreational, monthly, from the time their legal market started in January of 2014 all the way to the present month. And you can download it and do whatever you want with that data. There's just so much there that was so very, very helpful. So a few things to know about Colorado. There are 64 counties in the state. Those counties range in population from 705,000, Denver County, which is the largest, to the smallest county, which is San Juan County. And they record their cannabis sales figures by county. So that's why we're looking at county rather than municipality. So I wanted to be fair in doing this. So I thought, let me go to the midpoint. That's why I decided to look at the sales for the entire sales year of 2017. Their legal market started in 2014. They were just building it out. So you really don't have, that would be sort of an artificially deflated sales figures to look at. And then in 2020, they had their largest sales year. They hit $2 billion in sales, just recreational. I think that was combined. They hit $2 billion in 2020. So that to me was artificially inflated when we're trying to talk about New Jersey getting a market started on its feet. So I chose 2017 because it was right in the middle. So by December of 2017, there were 34 counties that were allowing the sale of recreational cannabis. And of those, only 24 reported a full year of sales. So I'm just really looking for the next few slides. We're just looking at those 24 counties as I was trying to keep, apples to apples. And then for the purposes of having the slides readable, I focused on the 10 counties with populations over 50,000. And then I threw in one extra one for good measure, and I'll talk about why when we get there. So what I was trying to do was kind of get to a population and sales figure, hoping that sales per capita would tell the story best. So that was the first thing I did, was I dropped everything into a spreadsheet, the county names, the population, the sales figures, and then eventually the number of licenses. And the first slide that I did was sales by population. And there were some inconsistencies that were really bothering me. For example, when you look at Pueblo County with roughly 166,000 people, they're about half the population of Weld, but they have had almost twice as much by way of sales. And then the number of licenses kind of came into that. So Pueblo actually has almost twice as many licenses as Weld County. So that sort of told a part of the picture, but I still wasn't real comfortable with what I was seeing. So then I went and I looked at the size of the counties to what that the number of licenses in relation to the I looked at the number of licenses in relation to the population. So Denver County, who has the most licenses with 514, they have one license for every 1,300 people. But Pueblo actually has one license for every 783 people. So it's about half. So it's the picture of outlet density started to come into clearer focus. So this is the spreadsheet that I was working with. And the final missing piece in this spreadsheet for me was the size, the actual physical size of the county. Because the calculation for density, the mathematical calculation for density is D, meaning density, equals mass divided by volume. So in our case, we already had the sales volume in total dollars. So then the M is land mass, or square miles per county. So the thing to remember about Colorado as a comparison to New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country. compared to Colorado, which has a population of 5.76 million people across 104,000 square miles. New Jersey has 3 million more people and is less than a tenth of a size. So put another way, Colorado has an average of 55 people per square mile. And of course, that varies by county. New Jersey has 20 times that number. So as we look at these sales figures, looking at outlet density really matters. Denver, Colorado is the most populous, has the highest number of cannabis licenses, but they also have 3 to 4 licenses per square mile. So I'd ask you to kind of think about what your town, the town you live in, looks like, and what 3 to 4 licenses per square mile might be. So I'm going to come back to density in a little bit, but for now, I want to turn our attention to the sales figures. So initially, because, as Kate mentioned in my bio, I oversee the DART Prevention Coalition, which is Ocean County's equivalent of the Prevention Coalition of Monmouth. And I was trying to get to some county numbers that would be helpful in Ocean. And it's hard because you only have Colorado counties, and Ocean County is enormous. We're the 12th largest, I think, in land mass, and the largest in land mass, the 12th largest in population. So I was kind of trying to do an apples to apples comparison. And where I landed was on Jefferson County at 574, almost 575,000 people. They are the closest to Ocean County's population. Of course, the census numbers are still coming out, but as of the last estimates, we were at 597,000 full-time residents, which of course swells with visitors in the summertime. So Jefferson County has a population similar to Ocean, but is 28 times the size in square miles. In 2017, they had almost $52 million in sales of recreational cannabis. So for the sake of argument, and that's what that red column is, suppose Colorado counties could tax just at the 2% rate, not what's currently being taxed on cannabis in Colorado, but just at the 2% rate that municipalities can assess in New Jersey. Jefferson County, AKA Ocean County, would have collected in fees $1,035,672. Okay. Well, given that Ocean County's 2017 county budget was $408 million, that cannabis tax revenue would account for 0.25 or 0.25% of the overall county budget, or just 1 cent on the tax rate. So there's a perception in the public that there's this boatload of money to be made on it. And I have to tell you, in Colorado, they're making a lot of money. But Colorado's state sales tax rate is 2.9%, which they collect on recreational cannabis. Then they tax their recreational cannabis at an additional 15%. So a net tax rate on recreational cannabis at almost 18%. That's an entirely different ballgame than 2%. So New Jersey, as I said, they opted to just tax a recreational cannabis at the state sales tax rate, which is 6.625, so almost 7%. And on the medical side, which I haven't talked at all about medical, and I'm not going to, but the state is also setting any sales tax on medical that will lapse, I think, by July of this year, either 2021 or 2022. So we're really just looking at that sales tax, the regular state sales tax in New Jersey. So then to circle back to our original jumping off point, which is density, it's going to be, in order for municipalities to make any money at 2%, it's going to be about density and how much outlet density they're willing to allow. Again, for the more rural counties, it might be a different ballgame, because if you're talking about cultivation or manufacture where they're moving hundreds of thousands of pounds through conceivably in a year, that could be a different ballgame. But I'm really just looking at, for the purposes of this conversation, mostly just dispensaries. So then there's the cost side, because towns that assess this 2% are 100% responsible for the collection and the costs associated with the collection. So these are just a few points to consider. It may be difficult for a town to know exactly how much a particular place is selling or moving through their doors without sending someone out to view establishment books weekly or perhaps even daily. The Cannabis Regulatory Commission is supposed to be setting up a tracking system, but whether or not municipalities will have access to that remotely is not known at this point. They will likely they may have to dedicate an employee, either full-time or part-time. Certainly will have to train that particular employee. If there's enough dispensaries, enough outlets that it warrants a full-time employee, now you're talking about salary, benefits, and pension contribution. There may be new finance software involved, because the way the law is written is that the tax revenues are to be paid to the finance office. But again, unless the establishments are using something that approximate Edmunds, which is the finance system most municipalities use, there might need to be some modifications or a new finance system put in place. And then right now, most cannabis businesses, there are some changes to the banking laws that are in the wind, but they're not final yet. So in order for a lot of cannabis businesses, it's mostly a cash business. So the municipality might have to send out a police escort with an employee or hire an armored car service. So that's a potential additional expense. What's on this slide is right out of the law. So it says that a municipality shall enforce the payment of delinquent taxes in the same manner as provided for municipal property taxes by placing a lien on the business premises. So now you're in the tax collector's office. So the finance office has to send the tax collector a statement showing any delinquent taxes that are due and the unpaid balance, and identify the lot and block number and place a lien against the property. And by enforcing it in the way of placing them as provided for by municipal property taxes, while people don't pay their property taxes, those properties go up for tax sale. So does that mean that municipalities now have to do tax sales on properties that are delinquent in their cannabis taxes? The next sentence says a lien shall be enforced as a municipal lien in the same manner as all other municipal liens are enforced. So municipalities can put liens against properties, for failure to maintain appearances and a variety of things. If they violate different things, they can put liens on the property, and those actually get resolved when the property is sold. But the law is kind of a little unclear here. So also keep in mind that within the retail class, there's a provision in the law for micro dispensaries, which are small businesses of, I believe it's 25,000 square foot or less. So conceivably, small dispensaries opening in strip malls. So now you're a landlord and you rent to a cannabis business, and that business is delinquent on their property tax, on their cannabis tax. Now a lien is getting placed against your property. So how does the landlord resolve that lien? And if that business dries up and blows away, now the landlord is on the hook potentially for resolving that lien, and the municipality has still not collected that money. So these are all things that are just that are not very clear in the law. So finally, I'm sort of closing in on the end of this. I want to circle back to where we started with the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. So as I said, that pamphlet law is 166 pages, and it lays out an awful lot, but there's a lot that it doesn't lay out. And some of those things I've talked about in this presentation. The law gives very, very broad powers to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission to adopt or change rules regulating all aspects of how the market is going to operate, including the number of licenses, that they'll allow they are the only issuing license authority. So even though municipalities can do a separate license, that licensee has to have a license from the Cannabis Regulatory Commission first. So the commission decides how many licenses are going to be issued in each class, and they can, that's a moving target depending on their assessment of the market demand. They establish licensing fees. They establish packaging, labeling, safety, and sanitation rules. They're also charged with creating and implementing a stamp similar to one that goes on tobacco products that will be placed on all packaging, and that stamp needs to be readable by a scanner. They need to establish a tracking system for cultivation, production, manufacture, distribution, and retail sales. They need to establish rules for business record keeping. They need to establish transport restrictions and advertising restrictions. And then each cannabis business has to employ certified cannabis handlers, and they need to establish certification standards for that and classes for people to go to become certified cannabis handlers. Workplaces need to have workplace impairment recognition experts to determine whether or not an employee is under the influence on the job. And there needs to be a certification standards for that, which the commission is responsible for establishing. Determine procedures for unannounced inspections and set sales limits. I'm going to throw on my prevention hat for one brief minute and just tell you that in all of this, with the exception of edibles, the law is silent on potency limits. So at this time, unless something changes, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission will not be setting potency limits on what's considered usable marijuana, usable cannabis, which is plant and flower. On the edible side, it's a maximum of 10 milligrams of active THC per serving, not to exceed a total 100 milligrams per package. So the Cannabis Regulatory Commission has public meetings. This is their website where you can see the meeting schedule. They do meet twice a month. It alternates between a daytime meeting, which I think is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, versus an evening meeting, which is 6 p.m. in the evening. You can join the meeting live. If you wish to speak, be heard on the record, you need to email them by noon of the day of the meeting, or you can actually email your comments to be included in the public record. So here's the takeaway, and I really appreciate all your time today. And then after this, I'll turn my camera back on and you all can ask questions. Given all of that, and the fact that the commission has met 3 times so far and has really not started publicly drilling down into some of these rules that they need to promulgate, it's very well likely that the rules may not be published and public before in time for municipalities to act, given that August 21st deadline. There's no penalty for towns to opt out now and wait and see how things go when the market's established. And I can tell you that's exactly what we did in Brick Township. I'm not saying it's the right way to go. There's no opinion on that, but none of us were comfortable with rolling the dice and leaving it to factors outside of our control at this time. So that's really all I have. Here are all my sources. I'll leave this up. I don't know if I leave it up, then I can't figure out how to turn my camera back on. But Kate has all of this and can send it out. And I believe she was going to record this to put on the website. So, this is not proprietary information by any stretch. So, I will stop sharing now, but I will say that a lot of it you will see came from verified Colorado sites and particularly the Department of Revenue.